My name is Adeline Williams, and I was 18 years old when my parents packed my things into two trash bags and left them at the edge of the driveway. No hug, no tears, just a silent expectation that I would disappear. I still remember the hum of the cicadas, the way the air felt too thick for September, and how I kept checking my phone, half expecting someone to say this was some twisted mistake. But they didn't. They just stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching me buckle under the weight of everything they had decided I no longer deserved. If you've ever had the people who raised you throw you away like spoiled food, you already know the taste of it. It's not anger, not yet. First it's shame. Then it's something darker. Before I explain how I went from being discarded at 18 to buying my own home at 25, I want to know, where are you listening from? Have you ever been left to fend for yourself when all you wanted was to feel safe? Leave a comment if you've ever had to start over from nothing, or if you've ever built something beautiful out of the ashes someone else lit. I'm not here to tell you it was easy, but I am here to tell you what happened, because no one gets to rewrite this but me. I grew up in a place called Ridgetown, a little strip of middle America so small you could walk from the edge of one cornfield to the next and hit every major landmark in under an hour. Our house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, a squat beige ranch with faded shutters and a porch swing that creaked like it was always mid-sigh. My mother, Angela, had this way of keeping the house spotless and joyless at the same time. Nothing personal hung on the walls, just framed needlepoints that said things like, "a place for everything," and, tellingly, "children should be seen, not heard." My father, Kenneth, was quieter, more shadow than presence. He worked nights as a warehouse supervisor and spent most of the daylight hours asleep or watching television with the volume too high, even when no one else was in the room. From the outside, I'm sure we looked normal. I got decent grades, made the honor roll most semesters, and played flute in the school band until sophomore year. But inside those walls, love was doled out like medicine, strictly by dosage, and always conditional. Praise didn't come unless you earned it in ways that made sense to them. If I cleaned the whole house without being asked, I might get a nod. But if I cried because I'd been humiliated at school, my mother would purse her lips and say, "Well, life's not fair, is it?" She didn't like messy emotions. She didn't like need. What she did like was control. Control is an insidious kind of love. It dresses itself up as structure, as discipline. But it doesn't leave room for mistakes or for softness. By the time I was 13, I'd learned that vulnerability had no place in our home. When I got my period for the first time and bled through my jeans during a sleepover, I called her in a panic. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't come to get me. She just said, "You should have known better," and hung up. I walked home that night, 1.5 miles, in the dark. My senior year of high school, I made the mistake of falling in love. His name was Cody Renshaw, and he had that golden boy thing going, varsity football, a toothy grin, and parents who hugged you when you came over. He wasn't my first kiss, but he was the first person who looked at me like I mattered when I wasn't doing something to earn it. We only lasted 6 months. My mother found a note he'd written me, sweet, harmless, something about wanting to build a life with me someday. She read it aloud at dinner, like it was evidence in a trial. My father didn't look up from his plate. I sat there frozen while she recited the words in a sing-song voice, smiling like it was all just a joke. The next morning, my phone was gone from the kitchen counter. She told me if I wanted to act like an adult, I could live like one. That was her favorite line in those last months. If you want to act grown, be grown. I tried.
God, I tried.
I got a part-time job at the gas station on Route 9 and applied to every scholarship I could find. I worked until midnight some nights, Still came home to curfews and cold dinners shoved into Tupperware on the bottom shelf of the fridge. I stopped talking back. I stopped asking for anything. I tiptoed through those final weeks like I was trying not to set off a bomb, but it didn't matter. They'd already decided I was a failure in progress. They were just waiting for a reason to call it official. The night they kicked me out, I'd come home 10 minutes past curfew. 10 minutes. There was no fight, no screaming. My mother met me at the door with her arms crossed and said, "You knew the rules." I thought she meant I was grounded. I thought she'd take my phone again, make me stay in for the weekend. But then my father appeared behind her with two hefty bags, the knot tied so tightly I had to cut them open later. He didn't say a word, just handed them over and walked back inside. I stood there with my whole life in plastic bags, no car, no money, no plan. You think you'll say something in moments like that. Something powerful. Something that will make them regret it forever. But all I could do was whisper, "Why?" And my mother, calm, precise, unblinking, said, "Because we gave you 18 years. That's more than some people get." There's a certain silence that falls after cruelty. It's heavy. It sticks to your skin. I sat on the curb until morning, clutching those bags like they were life rafts and not the remains of a girlhood that never got to bloom. Eventually, a neighbor came out, an older woman named Mrs. Dorsey, who walked her dog at dawn. She saw me, paused, and said, "Your folks know you're out here?" I couldn't answer. I just looked at her, and something in my face must have struck her because she said, "Come on in. You can sit on the porch till it's light." I stayed there 2 nights. She gave me blankets, made me tea, asked no questions. On the 3rd day, she handed me a crumpled envelope with $20 inside and the name of a shelter in Brookline. I hugged her so hard, I thought her ribs might crack. She just patted my back and said, "You're tougher than you think, sweetheart. You've got grit."
Grit. I didn't know what that meant at the time.
I thought it was just a nice way of saying, "You're alone now." But I'd learn. Over the next 7 years, I would learn exactly what grit looked like. I would live in places where the walls were so thin you could hear every sob through the drywall. I would eat canned soup for weeks at a time. I would work jobs that scraped away at my spirit until I couldn't remember what it felt like to want anything more than survival. But I never went back. Not once. I made a vow on that porch with Mrs. Dorsey's blanket around my shoulders. No one would ever get to throw me away again. And 7 years later, when I stood on the cracked front steps of a little yellow bungalow with keys in my hand and my name on the deed, I cried for the first time in years, not from pain, but from the stunning, undeniable fact that I had made it, that I had built something, that I was finally, irrevocably, home. The shelter in Brookline wasn't much to look at. A cinder-block building tucked behind a gas station. It smelled like old socks and microwaved meals, and the fluorescent lights buzzed so loudly that I sometimes pressed my fingers against my ears just to think. But it had beds. It had locks on the doors. And it had people who, for better or worse, saw me as someone who belonged somewhere, even if that place was temporary. I didn't know anyone, didn't trust anyone, and the first few nights, I slept with my shoes on, clutching my backpack like it was armor. But still, I was safe. I was 18 and entirely alone, but I was safe. There was a girl named Brianna who slept in the bunk across from mine. She had a cigarette rasp in her voice even though she couldn't have been older than 20, and she used to joke that I looked like one of the ones who used to be somebody's favorite. I didn't know what that meant until much later. She was sharp-tongued and suspicious, but she showed me where to keep my cash hidden, how to sign up for the job board early so I'd have first pick, and which of the night managers turned a blind eye if you missed curfew. "You're green," she said once while picking at her chipped nail polish. but you'll get hard.
We all do.
I didn't want to get hard. I wanted someone to tell me it was okay to still believe that I could get back to the girl I had been before the bags, before the silence, before I learned that blood ties didn't mean loyalty. But there was no space for softness in that world. Softness got you taken advantage of. Softness got you stuck. So I nodded, said thank you, and started building a shell around the parts of myself that still hoped. The first job I landed was at a diner off the highway, working the breakfast shift from 5:30 to noon. I poured coffee, wiped down sticky menus, and smiled until my cheeks ached. Tips were hit or miss, and I learned quickly that men in suits didn't tip better than truckers in torn jeans. In fact, they often treated me worse. One customer called me sweetheart so many times I started answering to it without realizing. But the diner gave me something I hadn't had in weeks: routine. A rhythm. A way to mark the passing days. I started to feel like I could survive. I saved every dollar I could. It wasn't much, but I opened a savings account with $50 and promised myself I'd never touch it unless I was dying. I stopped buying coffee, even though the smell of it at the counter made my stomach growl some mornings. I started cutting my own hair in the mirror with a pair of sewing scissors. Every decision became a calculation. What can I sacrifice now for something better later? And slowly, later started to feel possible. Community college came next. I applied through a public outreach program that paid for my first semester, and even though I worked double shifts some days and nearly failed algebra, I was proud just to be there. I didn't have a car, so I rode the bus 40 minutes each way, rain or shine. Sometimes I would sit in the back of the classroom, too tired to take notes, just listening, just soaking in the idea that I had a future again. I hadn't dared to believe that for a long time. Not since my mother's voice started living in the back of my head, whispering things like, "You'll never make it," and "You're not the kind of girl who gets out." I remember one afternoon, I saw a mother picking up her daughter from the student union. The little girl ran into her arms with this delighted squeal, and I froze. My tray of books almost slipped from my hands. I didn't know why that moment wrecked me so much until later that night, sitting alone on my mattress on the shelter floor. It was the way the mother smiled, the way her arms wrapped around the girl like nothing else mattered. I had no memory of ever being held like that. No memory of ever being someone's joy. And for the first time in months, I cried, not because I was scared, but because I was mourning something I'd never really had. But grief has its own kind of fuel. It burns in a way that propels you forward, even when it leaves scars. I leaned into the loneliness, the long nights, the back-to-back jobs, the semesters where I thought I'd drop out just to sleep. I leaned in because I had to, because no one was going to save me. Not the church, not some long-lost aunt, not my parents, especially not them. I never heard from them again, not even on my birthday. And eventually, I stopped expecting to. At 21, I finally scraped together enough to rent a room in a basement apartment on the east side of the city. It had mildew on the ceiling and a floor that always seemed a little damp, but it was mine.
Mine.
I didn't have to check out by 9 a.m. I didn't have to share a bathroom with 6 other women. I bought a secondhand mattress from a guy on Craigslist and carried it 3 blocks home on my back. I cried the first night I slept in it, not because it was uncomfortable, but because no one could kick me out. That year, I also got promoted to assistant manager at a local pharmacy. It wasn't glamorous, counting pills, handling angry customers who thought expired coupons were a human right, but it was stable. The manager, Clara, was a no-nonsense woman with salt and pepper hair and a quiet way of paying attention. One night, after closing, she handed me a folder with information on a city homebuyers program. "You keep showing up," she said. "That means something." Look into it. It felt laughable at first.
Me?
A homeowner? I was barely scraping by. But I read every word. I attended the free workshops, filled out every form with hands that trembled, and started running numbers on how long it would take to get my credit clean enough to qualify. Every night after work, I'd sit at the tiny kitchen table in my basement unit, budgeting with the kind of obsession most people reserved for wedding planning. I knew I wouldn't have a down payment for years, but if there was even a sliver of a chance, I was going to claw toward it like it was air. Meanwhile, I kept studying, switched from general studies to a health sciences track. It took longer because I could only afford part-time enrollment, but I didn't care. I was building something. I didn't know exactly what kind of job I wanted yet, nurse, maybe, or something in public health, but I knew I wanted to be in rooms where people needed help and I could give it. I'd spent too many years needing and being told I was a burden. I wanted to flip that script. But survival isn't a straight line. There were setbacks. Like the semester I failed anatomy and had to retake it on my own dime. Or the time my roommate bailed on rent and left me scrambling to make up the difference before I got evicted. Or the winter my heating went out and the landlord ghosted me for 2 weeks. I slept in 3 pairs of socks and boiled water to pour into the bathtub just to get warm enough to sleep. And through it all, I never once called my parents. I wanted to. Some nights I'd stare at their number in my contacts, finger hovering over the call button. But I never pressed it.
Frida?
Maybe. Or maybe I just knew the silence would say more than any apology ever could. By the time I turned 23, my credit score had crossed the threshold. Barely. I remember opening that email from the housing counselor like it was a golden ticket. I ran to the bathroom at work and locked myself in the stall, reading and rereading the line, "You have been pre-approved for first-time home buyer assistance." I wanted to scream. I wanted to dance. But mostly, I just sat there shaking because after everything, after the bags, after the nights on someone else's floor, after the years of being no one's priority, I had proof. I wasn't a burden. I was a builder. It took another year to find a house. I visited over 24 places, each one smaller and shabbier than the last. But then I saw it, a crooked little bungalow with peeling yellow paint and a porch that leaned like it had seen too many storms. It wasn't pretty. Not yet. But it had bones. It had soul. And it had a "for sale by owner" sign that looked like a dare. I took it. I closed on the house just 2 months before my 25th birthday. No one came to the signing. No one took a photo or brought champagne. But I walked out of that office with keys in my hand and the kind of smile that comes from knowing no one can take it away. Not this time. Not ever again. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and whispered, "You're home, Addie." And for the first time in my life, it felt true. Still, sometimes I wonder what they'd say if they saw me now. My mother, with her cold eyes and perfect posture. My father, with his silence. Would they pretend they didn't remember? Would they try to twist the story into something that made sense to them? Something where I left, not that they kicked me out? Part of me wants to confront them, throw my success in their faces like a weapon. But another part of me, the part that still remembers the sting of being unloved, knows better. Because some victories don't need an audience. Some homes don't need family photos on the wall. Just the knowledge that you built it yourself, from the ground up when everyone said you couldn't. And that's where I was when I got the letter. The one with my mother's handwriting on the front. The one I almost didn't open. The one that started everything that came next. It arrived in a plain white envelope, slightly crumpled, the way a letter looks when someone changes their mind 3 times before dropping it into the mailbox. My name was written in neat cursive, tight, conservative, just like I remembered my mother's handwriting. There was no return address, just the zip code from Ridgetown stamped faintly in the upper right corner. I stood in my doorway for a full minute before I even brought it inside. My heart thudded with a strange mix of dread and indignation.
Why now?
After 7 years of silence? After I had clawed my way out of the hole they left me in? I had a mind to toss it into the trash unopened, to protect the fragile piece I'd spent years building. But curiosity is a sharp thing, and old wounds itch when you pick at them. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper, the kind she always used for thank you cards and birthday notes. My mother's handwriting stretched across the page in delicate, slanted lines, as precise as the woman herself. "Dear Adeline," it began. "No, sweetheart. No, my daughter." Just my name, formal and distant, like I was a stranger she was trying to impress. She didn't apologize. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead, she wrote about my cousin Trina's wedding, about the family dog who had died a few months ago, about how the town was getting a new grocery store, and wasn't that exciting. It read like small talk at a bus stop. But halfway down the page, her tone shifted. "Your father's been sick," she wrote. "It started as something small, but now it's serious. We're doing what we can." She didn't specify what sick meant. No diagnosis, no details. Just an ominous cloud hanging over a man I hadn't spoken to since the day he handed me my belongings like a doorman showing someone out of a hotel. I read the letter 3 times. Each time, it made less sense. Not the content. The content was mundane. But the intent. What was she hoping for? Sympathy? Gratitude for the update? A reunion? I couldn't tell. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "We hope you're well. Maybe you'll come home and see us." It's been a long time. It landed like a brick in my stomach.
Home.
She still had the audacity to call it that. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, unsure why I didn't tear it in half. For a week, I didn't speak of it to anyone. I went about my routine, pharmacy shifts, night classes, picking up paint samples for the living room walls, pretending that piece of paper hadn't stirred something that felt like nausea wrapped in grief. But I was distracted. Off-center. I'd catch myself staring into space while stirring pasta or missing exits on the freeway. And then one night I cracked. I brought the letter to Clara, my manager-turned-friend, after we closed shop. We sat in the break room under buzzing fluorescent lights, the scent of old coffee lingering in the air. Clara read it once, then set it down carefully on the table. "She's fishing," she said, eyes narrowed. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't own anything. She just wants to reel you back in without addressing the hook she gutted you on. Her voice was calm, but there was a heat behind it. I nodded slowly. I had known it in my gut, but hearing it aloud made it real. "I just don't get it," I said.
Why now? What does she want from me?
Clara leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Maybe she wants to feel better about herself. Maybe her father's really dying and guilt's creeping in. Or maybe she just doesn't like the idea that you've done okay without them.
She paused.
But don't mistake a letter for an apology, Addie. There's a big difference between missing someone and missing their control. Her words settled into me like stones. And yet, as much as I wanted to ignore it, the letter had cracked open a door I thought I'd nailed shut. Memories started seeping in, quiet moments from a childhood I'd tried to leave behind. I remembered how my mother used to braid my hair for church on Sundays, her fingers brisk but gentle. I remembered how my father used to leave quarters on my windowsill when I lost a tooth, always exactly 3, and how I believed he was the tooth fairy until I was 9. There had been moments of warmth. Not many, but they existed. And that made it harder somehow. Abuse is easier to name when it's all sharp edges. But when cruelty comes laced with tenderness, it confuses the wound, makes you question if it really was that bad. A week later, I received another letter. This one was shorter. "Your father's been asking about you," she wrote. "He wants to see you before it's too late." No punctuation at the end. Just those words like a baited trap. I didn't respond. But I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked them up. Online, I mean. I typed their names into the search bar like I was looking for lost relatives, which, in a way, I was. There wasn't much. An old church directory. A blurry photo from a town hall meeting. And then, tucked in a local news piece about the county hospital's expansion, I found it. Kenneth Williams, retired warehouse supervisor, currently battling an undisclosed illness. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm that at least part of her letter wasn't fiction. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I repeated it like a mantra. You don't owe them anything. They made their choice. But then, one morning, I woke up from a dream where I was 13 again, sitting at the kitchen table while my father poured coffee into a chipped mug. In the dream, he smiled at me, said my name like it meant something. I woke up with tears on my face. The kind of tears that don't make noise. Just wet your skin and remind you that somewhere, deep down, the child in you still wants to be chosen. So I drove. Not to the house. Not yet. But to the edge of Ridgetown, where the road turns past the old high school and everything starts to look like memory. I parked near the baseball field and sat in my car, engine idling, watching the sky darken with a threat of rain. I hadn't been back in over 6 years. The trees looked taller. The buildings looked smaller. My chest felt tight, like I'd walked into a photo of myself and didn't recognize the girl in it. I didn't go further that day. I drove home before the rain started, gripped the steering wheel like it could anchor me. But something had shifted. I knew I'd go back. Not for them. Not to beg or forgive or pretend things could be repaired. But for me. Because part of healing is facing the place where the wound began. And because some ghosts don't stop haunting until you stare them down. The next weekend I returned. This time I parked right in front of the house. The same squat beige ranch, though the porch swing was gone. The shutters had been repainted, but the gravel road still crackled under my tires the same way it used to when I rode my bike in circles to kill time before dinner. I sat there, heart pounding. I hadn't planned what I'd say if someone came out. I didn't know if I'd even go to the door. But before I could decide, the front door creaked open. It wasn't my mother. It was a man. Thinner than I remembered, with a stooped posture and a face carved by time and illness. It was my father. He stepped onto the porch slowly, one hand on the railing like he needed it to keep from floating away. He didn't see me at first, but then he did.
And he didn't look surprised.
He just nodded, like I'd finally arrived at a meeting we'd both been avoiding for years. I got out of the car. My legs felt like jelly, and the gravel shifted under my feet with each step. When I reached the porch, we stood in silence. I saw his eyes, once dull and indifferent, now watery and soft. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse. "You came," he said. "I didn't say I'd stay," I replied. And with that, the past cracked open and the reckoning began.
He didn't ask me to come inside, not at first.
Instead, he shifted to the side and sat slowly on the wooden bench beside the door, wincing as though the act of sitting required more strength than he had. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do with my hands or my breath. The air between us felt too full, thick with all the words we hadn't said for 7 years. Finally, I sat beside him, leaving just enough space for memory to wedge itself between us like a third presence. "You look older," he said without looking at me. I turned to him, narrowing my eyes.
Yeah, well.
Getting kicked out tends to age a person. He nodded, slow and small, like he couldn't even pretend not to deserve that. I know, he whispered. His voice was raspier than I remembered, deeper, slower, like someone had taken the old version of him and submerged it in water. For a minute, we just sat there, listening to the wind knock the porch chimes against the gutter. It should have felt dramatic, cinematic even, but it didn't. It felt small, ordinary, like bumping into a stranger who happens to remember your name. I have lung cancer, he finally said, eyes fixed on the horizon. Stage 4. Spread to my spine. I felt my jaw tense, but I didn't move. I didn't gasp or offer some kind of automatic sympathy. I didn't know what he wanted me to feel. More importantly, I didn't know what I wanted to feel. I'm not here because of that, I said, trying to keep my voice even. You don't get to toss me out like garbage and then call me back in just because you're dying. I didn't call you, he said quietly.
She did.
I turned sharply. Then why didn't you stop her? He finally looked at me then, and there was something in his expression I didn't recognize, something raw and collapsed. Because I didn't think you'd come, he said. I laughed bitterly. You weren't wrong. He nodded again, folding his hands in his lap. They looked thinner too, veiny, spotted, the skin around his knuckles stretched tight. I was a coward, Adeline, he said, not looking at me anymore. I let her make the rules, and I followed them because it was easier than fighting. But it wasn't right. It wasn't right what we did to you. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to believe him. Both parts stayed quiet. Inside, the front door creaked open, and then I heard it, her voice. Kenneth, you shouldn't be out in this chill. Then silence. Her eyes met mine over the screen door, and her lips pressed into that same tight line I remembered so well. She didn't open the door all the way. She didn't smile, and she certainly didn't say my name. I see you got her letter, she said instead. I stood slowly, every nerve in my body buzzing like it remembered every cold breakfast, every door she slammed in my face, every lecture dressed as love. Yeah, I said. I got it. We stared at each other, the air between us brittle. For a moment, I saw the faintest flicker of something behind her eyes. Regret? Anger?
Pride?
I couldn't tell. She opened the door wider, but didn't move from the threshold. Do you want to come in? She asked, like we were acquaintances, not mother and daughter. No, I said flatly. Not today. A pause. Suit yourself. She turned and disappeared into the house, the screen door sighing closed behind her. I looked back at my father, who sat quietly, still staring out at the gravel road like it held all the answers he'd never asked for. I'm not here for her, I said. I know. I'm not even sure I'm here for you. He gave a slight nod. I just wanted you to know that I remember, that I regret it. All of it. I felt something shift then, not forgiveness, not exactly, but clarity. The kind that settles in your bones when the person who hurt you admits it without excuse. It wasn't enough, but it was something. We sat there another 10 minutes. Then I stood. I bought a house, I said abruptly, unsure why I even shared it. He looked up startled. You did. I nodded. At 25. On my own. No help. Something like pride flickered across his face. That's incredible, he said softly. You always were strong. I looked down at him, my father, frail, sunken, full of too late admissions, and I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt tired. I was just surviving, I said. But thanks. He smiled a little. Surviving is its own kind of strength. I turned to leave. As I stepped off the porch, he called out behind me, voice breaking like the end of a long-held breath. Addie. I stopped. If I don't see you again, I waited. I hope you know I did love you. I just didn't know how to show it. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My voice trembled as I replied, then I hope wherever you go next, you learn how. I got in my car and drove, this time not away from something, but toward the life I had built without them. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel triumphant. But for the first time in years, I felt unburdened, lighter. When I got home, I threw the second letter away.
No drawer this time.
No saving it for later. The door had been cracked open, but I didn't walk through it. I'd seen what I needed, heard what I didn't even know I'd needed to hear. And now I could close it on my terms. But the story didn't end there. Not even close. Because less than 2 weeks later, I got a call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. And that's when I realized my mother hadn't given up. She was just changing tactics. The voicemail was short, sterile, and as coldly impersonal as the woman who'd raised me. Hello, Miss Williams. My name is Jeffrey Lamb, and I represent the estate of Kenneth and Angela Williams. I'm calling regarding a recent update to Mr. Williams's legal affairs. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. There was no inflection, no urgency. But hearing those names again in the same breath, my father's and hers, sent something slicing through my chest that I couldn't quite name. I let the message sit for 3 days. I kept telling myself it was probably routine. Maybe some paperwork mistake, some final insult wrapped up in formalities. But deep down, a sliver of dread gnawed at the base of my spine. I kept going through the motions, opening the pharmacy every morning, restocking shelves, answering customer complaints with a trained smile. But every night, when the house was quiet and the walls creaked like they were remembering things I hadn't told them yet, my mind drifted back to that voicemail. On the 4th day, I called. Mr. Lamb's receptionist answered. Her voice was syrupy and practiced, the kind of tone meant to make you feel like everything was normal. Mr. Lamb is expecting your call, she said, transferring me before I could ask what this was about. The line clicked.
A pause.
Then his voice came through, measured, pleasant, completely detached. Miss Williams, thank you for returning my call. I stayed silent. I understand this may be unexpected, he continued, undeterred, but your father recently amended his will. As of 2 weeks ago, you've been named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. I blinked.
What?
Your father's health has declined rapidly, he said, and I heard a faint sound in the background, papers rustling maybe. He asked that the house and any remaining assets be transferred to you upon his passing. The house. That house. I don't want it, I said quickly, bile rising in my throat. Whatever guilt trip this is, I'm not interested. It's not conditional, Mr. Lamb replied smoothly. You're not required to take possession. But you are now the legal heir. If you choose to reject the inheritance, there's a formal process we can begin. However, there's something else. Of course there was. Your mother is contesting the will. That stopped me cold. She's what? She claims your father was not of sound mind when the amendment was made. She's filed a formal objection. There will be a hearing in 2 weeks. I was stunned into silence. My mother, the woman who told me at 18 that I had nothing coming to me, that I had gotten my 18 years and should be grateful for it. That same woman now wanted to argue, in court, that I wasn't entitled to a thing she'd actively ensured I never had? What does she even want? I asked, my voice cracking. According to her statement, Lamb said with a trace of distaste. She is asserting that you manipulated your father during his vulnerable state, that your recent visit influenced him to make irrational decisions. I laughed, short and humorless. I was on that porch for 20 minutes. Her case is weak, he said calmly, but she is determined. If she wins, the house becomes part of her claim as surviving spouse. If you contest and win, it's yours outright. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My hand was trembling. I don't even want the house. I have a house. A real one. One I built. Understood, he said. But your silence will forfeit the estate. And allow her to rewrite the ending. That last line landed like a punch. I knew my mother. Knew the way she operated. She didn't want the house. Not really. What she wanted was to keep me from having it. Even now, she couldn't stomach the idea of me claiming anything with our name on it. Not even something broken. I'll be there, I said. The courtroom wasn't dramatic, no sweeping windows, no gavel slamming, but it was suffocating in its own way. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the faint scent of old carpet and tired justice. I wore a plain navy blouse and black slacks.
No jewelry.
No makeup. Just me, pared down to the most unshakable version of myself. She walked in wearing cream.
Of course she did.
Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup subtle but flawless, and she sat with her spine so straight it looked painful.
She didn't look at me.
Not once. The judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a clipped voice. We're here regarding the contested will of Kenneth James Williams. MS. Williams, she nodded toward me. You're the listed beneficiary.
Mrs.
Williams, you're contesting that claim? Angela rose like she was at a church reading. Yes, Your Honor, she said calmly. My husband had recently undergone extensive medical treatment and was not thinking clearly. My daughter appeared, unannounced, after many years of absence. Days later, he changed the will. It's clear he was confused. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Lamb handled the facts. He presented the notarized will, the dates, the witness affidavits. He even had a statement from a hospice nurse confirming my father's lucidity the day he made the change. But none of that mattered to me in the moment. I was watching her, watching how she could sit there, lie so easily, pretend like she hadn't gutted her own child, and walked away whistling. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked, "Would you like to respond?" I stood. My voice didn't shake. I didn't ask for the house. I didn't even know about the will. I went to see a dying man because, for some reason, I still needed to know if he remembered what he did to me. If he regretted it. That's it. The judge nodded. And if the will is upheld, I'll accept it, I said. Not because I want the house, but because I won't let her erase the truth. Angela didn't flinch, didn't blink, but I saw it. The flicker of rage in her throat, the way her hands curled around the edge of the table. The judge took it under review. We were dismissed. Outside, I didn't speak to her, but she followed me to the parking lot. You're not owed this, she said sharply, stepping into my path. He was sick. He wasn't thinking. I turned to her, my voice low. He was thinking more clearly than you ever have. He finally did one thing right. Her lip curled. You really think he meant it? That house was ours.
We built it.
I took a breath.
No.
You built a place where fear lived, where silence ruled. I don't want it. But if it's between me and you, I'll take it just to make sure you can't keep pretending you were the victim. She stared at me like I was a puzzle she hadn't studied long enough to solve. And then she said it, the thing that stripped away her carefully applied polish. You should have stayed gone. I smiled, a small, bitter smile that didn't reach my eyes. You should have thought about that before you sent the letter. I walked away.
She didn't follow.
2 weeks later, I got the official ruling in the mail. The will stood.
The house mine.
Her challenge dismissed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast or dance or call anyone. I went to the little yellow bungalow I called home, curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, and sat in the quiet. Because I had won. And it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Almost. The house stood just as I remembered it, quiet and squat, the shutters still newly painted in that dull forest green my mother used to swear was timeless. But now, the for sale sign had been taken down, and my name, was on every deed and record associated with it. I stood in the front yard, keys in hand, staring at the porch where my father had sat that last day, where he looked at me with eyes that finally understood what they'd done. The wind rustled the dry grass around my ankles, and for a moment, I just listened. No one was inside. No one was waiting to scold me for tracking dirt, or ask where I'd been, or suggest that maybe I was the reason everything felt cold. I walked through the front door, without ceremony. It creaked, naturally, but the hinges still worked. The house smelled like old carpet and dusted over memories, and though I expected it to feel like a tomb, it didn't. It felt like a place I'd left long ago, frozen in time, waiting for someone else to decide whether it deserved to survive or collapse. The living room was nearly bare. Only the couch remained, the same lumpy brown monstrosity from my childhood that had once swallowed me whole during chicken pox and thunderstorms. I ran a hand along its worn fabric, tracing the groove where my father used to sit with a beer and the television volume, so high it drowned out anything I might have needed to say. The coffee table was gone. So were the family photos, the ones she used to keep precisely aligned along the mantel as if any tilt might reveal the lies behind them. Upstairs, the air was different, staler, heavier, as if time had gathered in the corners and refused to leave. I paused outside what had once been my room. The door still bore the faint scratches from when I'd locked it for the first time at 16, and my mother had used a bobby pin to force it open. I pushed the door gently, half expecting to find relics of the girl I used to be, but there was nothing. Not even a nail on the wall. The room had been scrubbed of me long ago. And yet I wasn't angry, because this time I got to choose what stayed. The next morning I came back with tools. Not to move in, I never planned to live there, but to gut it. To tear out what they left behind. The carpets first, then the cracked linoleum in the kitchen, the rusted fixtures, the wallpaper in the hallway that peeled in strips like old skin. I worked alone, day by day, room by room. I didn't keep anything, not even the old rocking chair from the den that once lulled my father to sleep after long shifts. I stripped the house bare until it no longer felt like theirs. Until it was just walls, framing, and floors. Until it was ready to become something new. And that's what I made it, a women's shelter. It started as an idea, something soft and shapeless that took form late at night when I couldn't sleep. What if the house that had once made me feel worthless could do the opposite for someone else? What if the same roof that had loomed over me like a threat could offer shelter instead of silence? I ran the numbers, made the calls, filed the forms. And the more I pushed forward, the more the house seemed to shift with me, like it knew it was being redeemed. I named it Willow House. For the way willows bend without breaking. For the way they keep their roots even in the worst storms. When we opened 6 months later, I stood on that same porch and watched 3 women walk through the front door. One of them carried a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, with her hair in braids and wide, tired eyes. She clung to her mother's neck, the same way I had once clung to the idea of safety. As they crossed the threshold, the girl looked back and smiled at me. Small, cautious, but real. And that's when I cried. Not for what I lost. Not for what they never gave me. But for the fact that, somehow, I had turned all that pain into a place that could hold someone else. I didn't tell anyone what the house used to be. That wasn't the point. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about every woman who walked in with nowhere to go. Every young girl whose story might have started like mine, but didn't have to end there. Sometimes, though, I drive past my own home, the yellow bungalow with the porch swing I hung myself, the garden I planted with lavender and wild rosemary. And I think about that 18-year-old girl with her belongings in trash bags, standing on a driveway in Ridgetown, trying not to cry in front of people who had already decided she was disposable. She didn't know she'd own 2 houses by 25.
She didn't know one of them would save lives.
She didn't know she'd stop chasing the word daughter and start building the word home from scratch. But I do. And if you're still listening, if you've made it this far, maybe there's something in this for you too. Maybe you've been thrown away. Maybe you're standing at the edge of everything you used to call love, wondering if survival counts for anything. Let me be clear, it does. So if you've built something no one ever believed you could, or if you're just beginning, drop a comment below. Share this story with someone who needs it. Someone who doesn't yet know that what broke you once can become the very thing that sets someone else free. Thank you for listening to my story.